Before we begin, let me speak to you for just a moment. Not as an expert, not as someone with answers, but as someone who understands how exhausting pain can be, being that I have been living with lupus. If you've been living with pain for a long time, you may already be tired in ways that don't always show. Tired of explaining, tired of adjusting your life around it, tired of wondering quietly whether this is just how things are now. So there's nothing you need to do here, nothing you need to prove. You don't even need to hope. Just listen. This story isn't about fixing anything. It's about letting your brain soften, about allowing your nervous system to rest, about noticing what changes when you stop racing. And you might find, as you settle in, that something inside you begins to ease, not because the pain disappears, but because you are no longer facing it alone. If that feels comforting in any small way, you can let yourself stay here a while. The story will take care of the rest. There was a man named Ethan who had stopped trusting his own body, not because it had failed once, but because it had failed every day. The pain had begun quietly years earlier. A dull pressure in his lower back, a stiffness in his neck that lingered longer than it should have, a strange burning sensation that moved unpredictably through his shoulders and his hips. At first, Ethan did what most people do. He treated the pain as if it were an enemy living in his muscles, or in his joints, or in the bones themselves. Doctors examined scans, therapists stretched and pressed. Medication softened the edge, but never touched the center. And slowly, Ethan's world began to shrink. He stopped walking as far, stopped sitting as long, stopped sleeping deeply, stopped planning for a future that felt unreliable. But pain had become the narrator of his days. What Ethan didn't know, what no one had explained to him clearly, was that pain is not only something the body has, it's something the body creates, not imagined, not fake, but interpreted. One night, unable to sleep again, Ethan sat hunched on the edge of his bed, staring at nothing in particular. His mind was loud, restless, scanning his body for danger the way it had learned to do over the years of discomfort. That's when he stumbled across a book he hadn't been looking for. It was called Change Your Brain, Change Your Pain, written by Daniel G. Amen. The title irritated him at first. It sounded too simple, too hopeful, too much like blame. But one sentence stopped him. By forcing your brain's health, you can significantly reduce or eliminate pain. Ethan didn't believe it, but something in him leaned closer anyway. As he read, he began to understand something unsettling and oddly relieving. Pain is processed in the brain, amplified in the brain, sustained by patterns the brain learns. When the brain is inflamed, overstimulated, anxious, depressed, or exhausted, it becomes exceptionally good at pain. Ethan recognized himself immediately. Years of stress, years of hypervigilance, years of poor sleep and constant self-monitoring. His brain had been living in alarm mode, and an alarmed brain interprets sensations as threat. For the first time, Ethan considered a radical possibility. What if his body wasn't broken? What if his brain was overwhelmed? He didn't overhaul his life overnight. There was no dramatic turning point. Instead, there was something quieter. He began with sleep, not as a luxury, but as a treatment. He reduced the late night scrolling, the blue light, the mental stimulation that keeps his nervous system buzzing. He changed how he ate, not dieting, not restricting, but feeding his brain food that reduced inflammation instead of fueling it. He began walking not to fix his pain, but to signal safety to his nervous system. And perhaps most importantly, he stopped constantly asking himself, how much does this hurt? Instead, Ethan practiced something new. He noticed neutral sensations, the weight of his feet on the ground, the warmth of a mug in his hand, the way his breath moved without instruction. At first, the pain protested. It surged, as if afraid of being ignored. But Ethan had learned something critical from the book. When you stop feeding pain with fear, attention, and expectation, the brain slowly stops prioritizing it. Weeks passed, then months. The pain didn't vanish in a dramatic flash. It lost importance. It became quieter, less convincing, less central. Some days it barely showed up at all. Other days it visited briefly, like a memory passing through, no longer demanding obedience. Ethan realized one morning, standing at the sink, sunlight touching the counter, they had slept through the night. No scanning, no bracing, no rehearsal of discomfort, just sleep. He hadn't fought his pain away. He had changed the environment in which it lived. By calming his brain, by nourishing it, by teaching it slowly that the world was no longer dangerous. Ethan understood something deeply now. Pain had once been his brain's attempt to protect him. It had just stayed on duty way too long. When the brain learns safety, the body follows. If you listen closely to this story, you might notice something subtle happening to you. A softening, a permission. Because the same brain that can create pain can also learn peace. And that learning begins not with force, but with care. Ethan didn't wake up one morning pain-free. That part mattered. Because what changed wasn't the sudden absence of pain. It was the absence of pain about it. And that was new. Where pain used to arrive like an alarm bell, sharp and urgent and demanding attention, it now arrived more like a knock, noticeable, but no longer in control. That subtle shift made Ethan curious, not desperate, not frantic. Curious in the way someone gets when something finally starts to make sense. So he went back to the book. This time, he didn't read it like someone searching for a rescue. He read it like someone learning how a system actually works. He began to understand that his brain had patterns, habits of activation it had practiced for years. Some brains, the book explained, get stuck in overfiring, lighting up too many areas all at once, never quite powering them down. Other brains become underactive, losing motivation, resilience, and pain tolerance. Ethan recognized pieces of himself in both. Years of stress had trained his brain to stay on. Years of disappointment had trained parts of it to shut down. No wonder his nervous system felt confused. So instead of asking, "How do I stop pain?" Ethan began asking a different question. What does my brain need to feel balanced? That question changed everything. it learned that pain isn't just about injured tissue. It's deeply connected to inflammation in the brain. Not just physical inflammation, but emotional, chemical, and cognitive inflammation too. Too much cortisol, too little sleep, too many unresolved worries looping at night. His brain wasn't broken. It was overstimulated and undernourished. So Ethan started feeding it differently. Not obsessively, not perfectly, but gently. He reduced the things that agitated his brain: constant news, late night screen, coffee that pushes system into overdrive. And he added things that signaled support instead of threat: omega-rich foods, steady protein, water before coffee. Not as a rule, but as a message. You're supported now. He also learned something that surprised him. The brain loves predictability. Not boredom, but rhythm. So Ethan created small routines that told his brain what to expect. Morning light, movement without strain, evening quiet. Nothing dramatic, but the brain noticed. Because a predictable environment tells the nervous system it doesn't need to stay alert for danger. And slowly, the volume of pain began to drop again. Not every day, but often enough to matter. Ethan also practiced something that felt strange at first. He stopped checking this pain constantly, because the book explains something subtle and powerful. Attention strengthens neutral circuits. The more the brain scans for pain, the better it becomes at finding it. So instead, Ethan practiced redirecting attention, not away from his body, but towards safety cues: a warm shower, a calm voice, the steadiness of his own breath. Each time he did this, his brain learned a new association. Body sensation does not equal danger. And then there was emotional work. This part surprised him the most. The book spoke about unresolved emotional stress as fuel for chronic pain. Not metaphorically, neurologically. Emotional pain activates the same brain regions as physical pain. Ethan began to notice how often his brain tightened when he felt unheard, over-responsible, or quietly resentful. So he started naming those emotions, not dramatically, just honestly. And when emotions were acknowledged, the pain often softened, as if his brain no longer needed to translate emotion into sensation. One evening, months later, Ethan realized something quietly astonishing. He had gone an entire afternoon without thinking about pain at all. Not because he was distracted, but because his brain didn't feel the need to mirror it. That's when he understood the deepest lesson of all. Pain had once been the brain's language of protection, and now the brain was learning a new language. A language of safety, of balance, of trust. Ethan didn't become fearless. He became regulated. And regulation, he learned, is where healing begins. Because when the brain is calm, the body stops shouting. And as Ethan stood there, breathing easily, he realized something profound. The resources had always been there. They weren't muscles to strengthen or joints to fix. They were neutral pathways waiting to be retrained. And once the brain learns peace, it remembers. Long after the book is closed, long after the pain loosens its grip, and that learning continues. So now that you've heard the story, you don't need to think about it anymore. You don't need to analyze it. You don't need to remember every detail because your conscious mind has already done its job, and now it can begin to rest. So take a slow breath in, not a forced one, just a breath that feels honest. And as you exhale, allow your jaw to loosen just a little. That's right. You may notice that when you stop trying to relax, your body begins doing it on its own. And that's important because real change, the kind that lasts, doesn't come from effort. It comes from allowing the brain to feel safe enough to let go. As you continue breathing in your own natural rhythm, you might become aware of how much your mind has been working, monitoring, scanning, anticipating. And it's okay to acknowledge that. There's nothing wrong with the brain that learned to be alert. That brain was trying to protect you. But now, there is nothing you need to guard against, nothing you need to fix, nothing you need to control. Your brain could take a break, and you might imagine, without effort, that each exhale sends a quiet message upward, from the body to the mind. You're safe right now. Not forever, not perfectly, just right now. And that's enough. You may begin to notice that pain, whatever form it has taken for you, doesn't need to disappear in order to relax. Pain doesn't need to be fought, because pain is a signal, and signals change when the system that receives them changes. So instead of focusing on pain, your attention can drift toward natural sensations. The weight of your body being supported, the surface beneath you doing its job, the quiet rhythm of breathing that continues without instruction. And as your attention rests there, your brain may start to shift out of alarm mode, out of urgency, out of constant checking. You don't need to tell it how. Your brain already knows how to change its states. It does it every night when you sleep, every time you daydream, every time you forget time for a moment. And right now, it's remembering that ability. You might imagine your mind like a dimmer switch, not turning off, just slowly lowering its intensity. Thoughts becoming softer, more spaced out, less demanding. And if a sensation appears, tightness, warmth, pressure, or even discomfort, you don't need to label it as good or bad. You can simply notice it and let it float in the background while your awareness settles somewhere calmer. Because the brain cannot focus deeply on danger and rest at the same time. And rest is beginning right now. You may start to feel a gentle heaviness, or a lightness, or perhaps a sense of drifting. All of that is okay. There is no correct way to do this. Your only task, if you can even call it that, is to allow your brain to learn something new. That it does not need to amplify signals to keep you safe. That it does not need to stay on high alert. That it can lower the volume. And as the brain quiets, the body often follows. Muscles soften, not because you told them to, but because they received permission. Nerves begin to calm, not because they're forced, but because they sense safety. And you may notice moments, even brief ones, where discomfort fades into the background. Those moments matter because they teach the brain what is possible. And every time the brain learns calm, it gets better at returning to it. So for now, you can let yourself drift. No goals, no expectations, just this gentle state of being where your brain is resting, your body is supported, and the need to manage pain is quietly stepping aside. And you can trust that this process continues long after this induction ends, as your brain remembers how to create ease instead of tension, calm instead of alarm, and comfort instead of constant effort. And for now, there's nothing else you need to do. Just allow yourself to rest here. So here are the key meanings of the story. Number 1, pain is a brain experience, not a personal failure. The story reframes chronic pain away from blame, weakness, or brokenness. Pain is presented as a protective signal generated by a brain that has learned to stay on high alert, not a sign that the person has failed to heal correctly. Underlining message: nothing is wrong with you. Your system learned something that can be unlearned. Number 2, the brain can become trained in pain, just like it can become trained in calm. Ethan's journey shows that pain persists not because the body is damaged, but because the brain has protected certain natural patterns for a long time. Underlining message: pain is not permanent, it's plastic. This quietly introduces neuroplasticity without naming it, allowing the listener's subconscious to absorb the idea naturally. Number 3, safety, not forced, is what lowers pain. Rather than fixing or fighting pain, the story emphasizes predictability, nourishment, rest, emotional acknowledgement. All of these signal safety to the brain. Underlining message: the brain releases pain when it no longer needs to protect it. Number 4, attention fuels what the brain prioritizes. The story subtly teaches constantly checking pain strengthens pain circuits, while gently redirecting attention to natural or soothing sensation weakens them. Underlining message: what you focus on, the brain amplifies. This empowers the listener without demanding effort or discipline. Number 5, emotional stress and physical pain share the same pathways. Ethan's emotional awareness reveals that unacknowledged feelings often express themselves through the body when the brain doesn't feel heard. Underlining message: pain sometimes speaks the language emotions were never allowed to speak. This creates permission for emotional honesty without re-traumatization. Number 6, regulation is more powerful than willpower. The story shows that healing happens not through motivation, grit, or forced change, but through the nervous system regulation. Underlining message: calm is not something you earn, it's something your brain remembers. This is deeply hypnotic because it removes pressure. And number 7, the listener is the real protagonist. Although the story follows Ethan, it is written so the listener unconsciously maps themselves into him. His curiosity, his relief, his learning. underlining message? If his brain could change, so can yours. So before returning to the rest of your day, before the mind begins scanning again, planning again, doing again, let me offer you one gentle reminder. Healing isn't something you do once. It's something you return to. And if stories like this help your nervous system soften, help your mind understand itself a little more kindly, help your body remember what safety feels like, then staying connected matters.